My name is Sarah. I'm 41 years old. And 2 years ago, I opened an email that made me question every single thing I thought I knew about my family. My hands were shaking. My coffee went cold. I just sat there, staring at the screen, reading the same line over and over again. The DNA results didn't match. Not slightly off. Not a marginal error. Completely, impossibly wrong. We had adopted our daughter from overseas 8 years earlier. We had the documents. We had the stamps. We had gone through every legal process required of us. We did everything right. But someone somewhere had lied. And they had used our love for a child to do it. What I found after that email changed everything: the adoption agency, the paperwork, the people we had trusted completely. I have evidence they still don't know I have. Before I tell you what actually happened, if you're new here, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps more than you know. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? 8 years ago, my husband Daniel and I sat in a small waiting room in an adoption agency office in Chicago. Plastic chairs. Fluorescent lights. A potted plant that hadn't been watered in weeks. We had been trying to have a biological child for 6 years. 6 years of appointments, medications, failed procedures, and silent drives home from hospitals. We were exhausted. But we still wanted a family. The agency was called Bright Futures International. They specialized in overseas adoptions. Their website had photos of smiling children and glowing testimonials from families across the country. We believed every word. The caseworker's name was Margaret. She had a firm handshake and a laminated badge. She slid a folder across the table and told us the process would take 18 months. It took 3 years. Every few months, a new delay. A missing document. A processing hold. A government regulation change in the child's home country. We never questioned it. We were told delays were normal. We were told to be patient. So we waited. Then one morning, Margaret called. She said a 3-year-old girl had been matched to us. She was in an orphanage. She was healthy. She needed a home. I remember grabbing Daniel's hand so hard his knuckles went white. We said yes before she finished the sentence. We had no idea what we were actually saying yes to. We flew out 6 weeks later. 14 hours in the air. 2 layovers. A connecting flight on a plane so small it shook the entire journey. Daniel slept. I couldn't close my eyes. The orphanage was a 2-story concrete building on the edge of a city I had only seen on Google Maps. The hallways smelled like disinfectant and boiled vegetables. The walls were painted yellow, but the paint was peeling in long strips. A woman in a gray uniform led us down a corridor. She stopped at a door, knocked twice, opened it, and there she was, sitting on a narrow bed, holding a worn stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. She had dark eyes that didn't blink when she looked at us. She didn't smile. She didn't move. She just watched us. The translator said her name was Lena. I sat down on the floor so I wasn't towering over her. I held out my hand. She stared at it for a long time. Then she placed her small hand in mine. I didn't cry in that room. I held it together. I was determined to hold it together for her. I cried in the bathroom 20 minutes later with the tap running so nobody could hear me. We spent 4 days completing paperwork, meeting officials, signing documents in languages I couldn't read. Every page was stamped. Every signature witnessed. Everything looked completely legitimate. That word legitimate would come back to haunt me later. We brought Lena home on a Thursday in November. It was cold. She had never seen snow before. At the airport, she pressed her face against the glass and watched the frost on the runway for 5 full minutes. Daniel and I stood behind her and didn't say a word. We had prepared her room for months. Yellow walls. A bookshelf already full. A nightlight shaped like a moon. She walked in, looked around once, and went straight to the window. She wasn't interested in the toys. She wasn't interested in us yet. That was fine. We had been told to expect that. The first few months were hard in ways the agency pamphlets never mentioned. Lena didn't speak English. We didn't speak her language. We communicated in gestures and expressions and a lot of patient silence. She had nightmares. Most nights I heard her before midnight, whimpering behind her closed door. I would sit outside in the hallway, not going in unless she called, just being close enough that she wasn't alone. Slowly, things shifted. She started calling me Mama somewhere around month 4. Not to my face. I heard her say it to her stuffed rabbit when she thought no one was listening. I pretended I hadn't heard. But I stood in that hallway for a long time afterward, back against the wall, hand over my mouth. By the end of year 1 she was enrolled in school. She had two friends. She had opinions about breakfast. She was ours. Completely and totally ours. Or so I believed. 7 years passed. Lena turned 10 in March. We had a party with 12 kids, a chocolate cake, and a dog we had finally caved and adopted the previous Christmas. She was loud that day. Opinionated. Dramatic about the candles taking too long to light. She was perfect. That same month, my sister Karen came to visit from Portland. She had just done one of those consumer DNA tests. The kind you see advertised everywhere. She spent the entire dinner talking about it. Apparently, she had discovered a third cousin twice removed in New Zealand. She was unreasonably excited about this. By the end of the night, she had convinced Daniel to order a kit. Just for fun. Just to see the heritage breakdown. Something to do on a Sunday afternoon. The kit arrived 2 weeks later. Daniel did his. I did mine. Karen suggested we do one for Lena too. Just to have her heritage information on record. To give her something concrete about where she came from when she was older. It seemed like a kind thing to do. Lena thought spitting into a tube was the funniest thing that had ever happened to her. We mailed all 3 kits on the same day. 3 weeks later the results arrived in my inbox. 1 email. All 3 profiles ready to view. Daniel's results loaded first. Then mine. Then I clicked on Lena's. I read the first line. Then I read it again. Then I closed the laptop. I sat completely still for 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the microwave. Then I opened it again. The results said Lena had a sibling. Not a distant relative. Not a second cousin. A sibling. A full biological sibling. Shared mother. Shared father. The kind of match that leaves zero room for interpretation. His name on the profile was Marcus. He was 22 years old. He lived in Ohio. My first thought wasn't anger. It was confusion. Lena was 10. This man was 22. That meant he existed before she was even born. That meant her biological parents had another child. A child they kept. They kept him and gave her away. I told myself there could be explanations. Circumstances change. People make impossible choices. I closed the tab. I made dinner. I helped Lena with homework. I watched television with Daniel and said nothing. At 11 that night I got back on the laptop. I found Marcus on social media in under 10 minutes. His profile was public. He had a round face and dark eyes exactly like Lena's. He posted about basketball. He had a dog. He looked completely ordinary. I sat with his profile open for a long time. Then I saw it. In his photos. 3 years back. A woman standing next to him at what looked like a graduation. She had her arm around him. She was smiling. I recognized her immediately. I had met her once. Briefly. In a corridor in an overseas orphanage 7 years ago. She was wearing a gray uniform. She had knocked twice before opening the door. I didn't sleep that night. By 3 a.m. I had a notebook open on the kitchen table. Names. Dates. Screenshot printed on our home printer. Daniel found me there at 6 in the morning. I turned the laptop toward him without saying a word. He sat down slowly. Read everything. Looked at the printed photo. Then he looked at me. We didn't speak for a long time. The first call I made was to the adoption agency. Bright Futures International. I asked to speak to Margaret. The receptionist told me Margaret no longer worked there. I asked when she had left. 3 years ago, she said. I asked for a forwarding contact. The receptionist hesitated. Then she said the agency had gone through significant staffing changes and she couldn't share personal information. I hung up. Daniel spent that afternoon pulling every document from the filing cabinet. The original placement papers. The background reports. The translated birth certificate. We spread everything across the dining table. He found it within an hour. Lena's official birth record listed her as an only child. No siblings noted. Father unknown. Mother deceased. But Marcus was alive. And so was the woman in that gray uniform. I called a lawyer friend that evening. I described the situation in broad terms without using names. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Sarah, if what you're describing is accurate, this isn't a paperwork error." She said, "This looks intentional." She said, "You need to stop making calls immediately." I put the phone down and looked at Daniel. Lena was upstairs doing homework. I followed the lawyer's advice for exactly 4 days. Then I couldn't anymore. I found an international adoption fraud investigator through a private forum online. His name was Robert Chin. He had spent 11 years working for an immigration advocacy organization before going independent. We met on a video call. I showed him everything. He didn't look surprised. He asked me which country the adoption had originated from. I told him. He nodded slowly and wrote something down. He said he had seen cases from that region before. I asked him how many. He said, more than I'd like to tell you right now. He asked for copies of everything. The placement papers, the birth certificate, the agency correspondence, every email Margaret had ever sent us. I uploaded it all that night. 3 days later, Robert called back. He said the orphanage Lena had been placed in had been investigated by local authorities 2 years after our adoption was finalized. He said the investigation had been quietly closed. He said 3 caseworkers had been reassigned to different facilities. Not fired. Reassigned. I asked about Margaret. He paused. He said Margaret had processed 14 international adoptions through Bright Futures in a 4-year period. He said 6 of those families had since flagged irregularities. He said 2 had filed formal complaints that went nowhere. I asked where Margaret was now. He said, that's what I'm still working on. Then he said something that made the room feel very small. He said, Sarah, Marcus didn't find Lena by accident. He was looking for her. Marcus had registered on the DNA platform 18 months before we did. He had been searching. Robert sent me a timeline. Marcus had uploaded his profile, marked himself as open to contact, and listed in his bio that he was looking for a younger sister. Younger sister. He already knew she existed. I stared at that for a long time. Daniel wanted to contact Marcus immediately. I said no. Not yet. We didn't know enough. We didn't know who else was involved. We didn't know what Marcus knew versus what he had been told. There was a difference. And that difference mattered. I went back through every email Margaret had ever sent us. 3 years of correspondence. I had kept everything. I started reading with different eyes. The delays made a different kind of sense now. The missing documents. The processing holds. Each delay had pushed our adoption into a new calendar year. Each delay had generated new fees. $40,000 total. Paid in stages. Every payment requested just as a new obstacle appeared. I got out the notebook again. I wrote down every date. Every payment. Every excuse Margaret had given us. The pattern was right there. It had always been right there. I just hadn't known to look for it. I called Robert the next morning. He told me he had located Margaret. She was working at a different agency. In a different state. Still processing international adoptions. Still doing it. I felt sick. I asked Robert what our options were. He said, that depends on one thing. How far are you willing to take this? I told Robert all the way. He connected us with an attorney who specialized in international adoption fraud. Her name was Diana Reeves. She was based in Washington, D.C. She had handled 4 federal cases involving fraudulent overseas placements. We flew out to meet her on a Tuesday. Her office was on the 7th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Case files stacked in precise columns on every surface. She shook my hand and got straight to it. She said Lena's case presented 3 distinct legal problems. First, the birth certificate filed with the U.S. immigration authorities contained a material misrepresentation. Listing her as an only child with a deceased mother was not an oversight. It was a deliberate falsification of a federal document. Second, the fee structure Robert had documented showed a pattern consistent with fraud. Money extracted through manufactured delays was not agency incompetence. It had a name in federal law. Third, and this was the one that made my stomach drop. Lena's citizenship documentation was tied directly to the validity of the original placement papers. Diana said it plainly. If those papers were fraudulent, Lena's legal status in this country was complicated. I asked her to define complicated. She chose her words carefully. She said the risk was low, but it was not zero. She said we needed to move carefully. She said any public action before the documentation was secured could create problems we couldn't walk back. I asked how long securing the documentation would take. She said 6 to 8 months minimum. I looked at Daniel. 6 to 8 months of knowing what we knew. 6 to 8 months of sitting across from Lena at breakfast every single morning. Saying nothing. We said nothing for 8 months. Every morning I made breakfast. Every evening I helped with homework. Every weekend we went to Lena's soccer games and cheered from the sideline like nothing was happening. Daniel was better at it than me. I would watch Lena laughing at dinner and feel the weight of everything we were carrying pressing down on my chest. She noticed something was different. Kids always do. One night she asked me if I was okay. Just like that. Direct. The way she always was. I told her I was tired from work. She looked at me for a second longer than necessary. Then she went back to her food. Meanwhile, Diana was building the case. Robert was documenting the pattern across all 14 of Margaret's adoptions. 2 other families had agreed to participate. Both had DNA irregularities. Both had paid inflated fees through manufactured delays. In month 5, Robert found the woman in the gray uniform. Her name was Elena Vasquez. She had worked at the orphanage for 9 years. She had left 8 months after our adoption was finalized. She had relocated twice since then. She was Marcus's aunt. Not a distant connection. His mother's sister. I read that line 3 times. The woman who had opened that door. Who had watched me sit on the floor and hold out my hand to Lena. Who had watched me cry without knowing I was crying. She had known exactly who we were taking home. She had stood right there and said nothing. Diana filed the formal complaint in month 7. 2 weeks later, Margaret was suspended from processing any new adoptions pending investigation. It wasn't enough. But it was a start. The investigation opened in October. Federal. Not state. Diana had pushed for federal jurisdiction given the immigration documentation angle. It took 4 months to get there, but it landed where it needed to. 3 other families joined by November. Then 2 more in December. 7 families total. Across 5 states. All connected to bright futures. All connected to Margaret. Robert presented the fee pattern analysis to investigators. 40 pages. Every delay. Every payment request. Every manufactured obstacle mapped against the calendar. The investigator assigned to the case called Diana after reviewing it. He said, "This is not sloppy. This was designed." Margaret was formally interviewed in January. I wasn't in the room. Diana called me immediately after. She said Margaret had retained her own attorney. She said Margaret had denied everything. She said Margaret had described the irregularities as standard processing variations common in international adoption cases. Standard processing variations. I wrote that down in my notebook. I had filled 4 notebooks by this point. In February, Robert confirmed that Elena Vasquez had been located and interviewed by investigators overseas. She had cooperated partially. She had acknowledged knowing Marcus. She had acknowledged her relationship to Lena's biological family. She claimed she had believed the adoption was consensual. Daniel didn't believe her. I wasn't sure what I believed anymore. Then Diana called on a Wednesday afternoon. She said investigators had found something in Margaret's financial records. Payments. Regular. Going back 6 years. From an overseas account tied to a name we didn't recognize. She said someone was paying Margaret per placement. Per child. Margaret was charged in March. Federal charges. Wire fraud. Immigration document falsification. Conspiracy. The name tied to the overseas account was a man who had operated a child placement network across 4 countries for over a decade. Interpol had a file on him. It was thick. He was arrested 6 weeks after Margaret. I found out on a Tuesday morning. Same day of the week as the DNA results. Same kitchen. Same coffee going cold. Different feeling entirely. Diana called with the details. I listened. I said thank you. I hung up. Then I sat there and realized the legal part was over. The harder part was still waiting. We told Lena that weekend. Saturday morning. No soccer game. No plans. Just the 3 of us at the kitchen table with the dog asleep in the corner. Daniel and I had practiced what to say for weeks. Every version felt wrong. In the end, I just started talking. I told her about the DNA test. I told her about Marcus. I told her about the investigation. I used simple words. I watched her face the entire time. She didn't cry. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she asked one question. She said, "Did you know when you came to get me?" I said no. I told her we had no idea. I told her if we had known what was happening we would have burned the whole system down to stop it. She nodded slowly. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. Same way I had held hers. All those years ago. On that narrow bed. In that yellow hallway. She said, "Okay, Mama." 2 words. That was enough. We met Marcus 4 months later. That is a story for another video. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you were adopted internationally and you have never taken a DNA test, please consider it. Not to unravel your life, but to know the full truth of it. You deserve that.